Hey everyone, welcome to Great Lakes Church. My name is Carson, and I gotta tell you before we get into our weekly message that we're a community of people helping people find and follow Jesus. We're based out of Southeast Wisconsin. We have physical locations in Kenosha and Racine, but if you're listening to this or watching this, you've found our online presence. We share content on our YouTube and our podcast platforms wherever you listen, and we love that you're a part. If you want to know more about what's going on here at Great Lakes Church, you can find out more at greatlakeschurch.com or check out our central hub. But until then, everything you need is going to be in the description, so enjoy the message, and we'll catch you next time.
Well, hello, everybody. Guys, several weeks ago, we kicked off this series called Ready or Not. And of course, it is a series about change. And the whole idea is that whether we're ready for it or not, change is coming. It's coming to our homes. It's coming to our places of work. It's coming to our church. It's coming to every aspect of our personal lives. We can't escape it. 3,000 years ago, King Solomon of Israel, in one of his books, writes that for everything, there is a season. A time for every activity under heaven. All right, so there is a time to start things and a time to stop things. There's a time to laugh and a time to mourn. There is a time to keep things and hold on to them. There's a time to throw things away. There is a time to build and there is a time to tear down. So when I was in high school, every day, or at least almost every day, I would drive by a site where they were building Dairyland Greyhound Park. All right. Of course, it ended up being finished in the summer of 1990, held more than 12,000 people. Well, 30 years later, Dairyland closed its doors and it was demolished, right? It was torn down. The site, as many of you know, is currently being developed as a business park. Heartland Produce has built its new headquarters and distribution facility on the site. There's other businesses to come. And it really is a good picture and a good metaphor for our life. That everything in life is seasonal. And every season that comes brings change, and there's different amounts of change, and there is different types of change. So the last several weeks, we've talked about change. We talked about evolutionary change, which is a gradual process of changing into something different. This is when you are single, you are getting married, you're engaged, and you're moving towards that, and you see it happening. It's evolutionary change. Crisis change is a sudden event that forces change on you. Right, this is a death. This is a natural disaster. This is you lose your job without any notice. That is crisis change. And then visionary change is change that you voluntarily initiate. You purposely make changes because you have a vision of what you want your marriage to be. You have a vision of what you have for your health. You have a vision of something in your life, and so you start to make changes in order to work toward it. And what I want to do today as we wrap up this series is I want to talk about a reality of change that all of us have to embrace at some point, and that is this, that transitioning from one season to the next always requires ending something. Transition always means at some point, at some level, we're going to leave something behind. As human beings, one of the biggest challenges we face is learning how to end things and how to end them well. And because it's so challenging, what we often do is we don't do it. We avoid it. We put it off, and we get stuck in different patterns and different cycles and in different seasons that just drag on and on and on. Now, a guy by the name of Dr. Henry Cloud wrote a book called Necessary Endings, and his whole book is about this kind of stuff. He says endings are an essential part of life. Now, think about this, right? If things never ended, all of us would be stuck in our very first job, which for me was Six Flags. I'd still be guessing your age, your weight, and your date of birth, right? That's what I'd be doing. If there was never an ending to anything, all of us would be unhappily married to our very first date. Right, to our it's like, oh, collectively, like almost this vomit, right? If things never ended, all of us would still be in first grade because we would have never passed and went to second grade, so we'd be learning the same things over and over and over again. Endings are a very good thing. I've talked about this before. I don't know that all of you know this, that my mom at one point wanted to be a nun, okay? Wanted to be a nun in the Catholic Church, but thank God that dream came to an end. when she met my dad. Yeah, right? So they end up having 7 children together. By the way, when I saw this picture, I was thinking, I don't think her dream came to an end as much as the Catholic Church says, not a skirt that short. We ain't taking that. That's ungodly. So there you go, all right? But at some point, that dream had to come to an end. We could all talk about things that we envisioned for our life, and then they came to an end, right? And here's the deal. If we are unable to end things, what happens? We flounder. We never reach our goals. We never reach our dreams. And we end up being held prisoner to our situation, regardless of how painful or destructive it is. So if we're going to grow, if we're going to mature, there are certain things in this life that we need to be proactive about in ending them. All right, so imagine a rose bush, right? If a rose bush is going to be healthy, if it's going to reach its full potential, if it's going to blossom the way it should, at some point it has to be pruned. Right? It has to be cut. There has to be some sort of systematic process for pruning, because pruning isn't going to happen naturally, like just on accident. Someone has to decide to prune it. And typically, what will happen is a gardener will prune or cut off branches and buds that fall into one of 3 categories. All right, here they are. They will cut healthy buds or branches that are not the best ones. All right, this is when a rose bush produces more life than the plant can sustain long term. There's just too many buds, and so a gardener will come and prune some of the buds. The second category is sick branches that are not going to get well, right? And by cutting them or pruning them, it enables the plant to pour even more life into the healthy buds. And then the third category is dead branches that are taking up space needed for the healthy ones to arrive. So in order for healthy branches to reach their full potential and their full length and height, got to cut off the dead ones. And the same is true in life. Right? At some point, we've got to step back and consider, like, what am I going to prune in my life? Because if all we do is we add more and more events to our schedule, and more stuff to our homes, and more obligations to our life, eventually we are going to become ineffective and burned out. Because none of us have unlimited time and energy and resources. And so we have to be intentional about rationing. Taking what we have and learning to ration. Now, this was very common in World War II, right? World War II, rationing was a big deal because there was very limited supplies with things like food and metal and paper and coffee and rubber. And so the US government gets involved and says, hey, you have to ration. And what they did is they rationed a certain number of points to different individuals, every person, right, including babies. And then when you went to buy something, you had to give money to buy it, but you also had to exchange points. So in 1943, if you wanted to buy bacon, it cost 30 cents for a pound of bacon. Ooh, wouldn't you love 30 cents for a pound of bacon? But here's the deal. At the same time, you had to give your 30 cents. You also had to give 7 ration points in order to buy it. They said, we don't have enough for everybody. We're in war. We have limited supplies. And here's the deal. If we are unable to ration things in our life or prune things or end things, inevitably we're going to be stuck in whatever season or whatever circumstance we find ourselves in. We'll never make it into the next chapter of our life if we can't learn to end things in this chapter. So here's what I want to do, just to be real practical. As you look at your life, I want you to consider a couple of questions. As you consider what you're going to prune, what you're going to cut back, here are 3 questions to consider. What is good right now in your life, but it's not best? Years ago, my wife and I used to hang out with another couple on a regular basis, good people. But we were spending almost every weekend with them, and we came to a point where we just kind of felt like there was really, it wasn't like this mutual beneficial type of relationship, and I don't know that they were getting much from us or we were getting much, and it just kind of felt like we were wasting our weekends. We weren't meeting new couples, we weren't hanging out with new people, and so my wife and I, in that season of our life, decided, hey, it's good, but it's not best, so we are going to prune it. Now, we did not cut it off. We did not say, we will not hang out with you anymore, right? We didn't do that. We just started scheduling, hanging out with other people. We still hung out with them, just not near as much. It was good, but it wasn't the best. We had to prune, we had to cut back. What is sick and not getting better? What is sick and not getting better? So you have to prune it, you have to cut it, you have to do something about it. A few years ago, I realized that there was some unhealth in our staff, not toxic, not abusive, not that kind of stuff, just some unhealth. And the reason why is because my leadership style had not changed. To this day, I still wrestle with this. It's called founder syndrome. Founder syndrome is when you start something and you make every decision and everybody relies on you because you're the founder. But we were 10 years into this. We were 11 years into this, and I was still approving every email. I was still being asked questions about, hey, do you like where this sign is? Hey, do you approve the look of this? Hey, Dave, this program, this system, can you look through this? Hey, this job description. Hey, when it comes to hiring, Dave. And I was not just allowing it, I was comfortable with it. This is what I had always done. And then it started to hit me how much I was responsible for, so I would have to learn things like, nope, can't look at it. Don't include me in the email. So if you get an email from this church and it has typos or grammatical errors, it's because I didn't see it, right? But I had to cut off things. I'm still learning it because there's so much that I just have done over the years. But when you look at it, it's like, Dave, that's a really unhealthy thing. It's sick and it's not getting better. You have to choose to cut some things off and let other people take over, right? What is long dead? Right? What is long since dead? Multiple times in my life, I look back at the time I was spending watching TV or on social media or whatever it was. And I just had to say, in this season, I got to cut this. Or I got to prune it. I got to cut it back a little bit because it is killing me, the time it's taking. Endings are part of life. And so to hammer this point home, what I want to do today, I want to walk through a story that's found in our Bible. It's a true story. And it really does reflect the importance and the value of ending things. Now, I'm going to tell you right up front, so do not miss this. This is so important. I am not leading up to some dramatic ending in the story. And the reason I say that is because the way the story unfolds, it's going to sound like, what announcements Dave going to make? Where's he going with this? That is not where we're going with the story, but it's so powerful and it's something that all of us can benefit from as we apply it to our lives. And to understand the story, what we have to do is we have to understand the history of the nation of Israel. All right, so if you're not familiar with the origins of Israel, it goes back 4,100 years ago to a guy by the name of Abram. We know him as Abraham. Right? Abraham is around retirement age, and God interrupts his life, and he makes a series of promises to him. God promises Abraham, he says, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make you famous. People everywhere are going to know about you. And here's the deal, Abraham, I'm going to bless you with lots and lots and lots of descendants who are going to come together. They're going to form a nation together, and they're going to have lots and lots of property that they'll eventually call their own. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple different individuals today, just to keep it clear so we know who we're talking about. Abraham, when we talk about him, God promised to give him lots of descendants who would form into a nation and have lots of land to call their own. That's Abraham. He receives this initial promise from God. Well, not long after God makes his promise, Abraham has a son by the name of Isaac. Isaac goes on to have two sons, Esau and Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. And before long, this small family grows to a family of about 70 people, and they move from Canaan, where they're living, to a land of Goshen, which is part of Egypt. And that's where they settled, right? So Canaan is over here. Goshen is over here in Egypt. This is an old school map. This is the Red Sea. This is the Mediterranean Sea, all right? Well, while they are in Egypt, this family becomes known as the Hebrew people. They're known as the Hebrews. And they're initially accepted and loved and embraced, all 70 of them. But over time, the Hebrews start breeding like rabbits. And the Egyptians get afraid. They become fearful. They say if they grow too big, they're going to make this their own land and their own territory. And so they, in order to make sure the Hebrews don't gain control, they turn them into slaves and force them to build cities and structures. Well, they ended up in slavery for 430 years. And after 430 years, God uses a man by the name of Moses to free the Hebrew people and lead them out of slavery in Egypt. And after they leave Egypt, they spend the next 40 years in the desert. All right, so we already talked about Abraham. Moses is the guy who led the Hebrew people out of slavery in Egypt and then guided them in the desert for the next 40 years. This is important. All right, he was their leader for 40 years. Now, Moses was insecure. He was always feeling like, I can't do it. I'm not qualified. I'm not good enough. And so God, on a regular basis, would do something in and through Moses, miraculous things, supernatural things, to show Moses and the people of Israel, hey, ultimately, Moses, Doesn't matter how insecure you are. Doesn't matter how insignificant you feel. I'm in charge. I have all power. I can do all things. And so for 40 years, Moses is leading the Hebrew people in the desert. It's a time period where God is forming them as a nation. God is developing them as a group of people. It's during this time where God gives them 613 laws. So they have rules and structures to kind of help govern them, and they know how to interact with each other. When it comes to eating, God provided for them every day in supernatural ways. When they were attacked by other tribes or other nations, God would supernaturally protect them. God would get involved and help empower them. He'd protect them. And so for 40 years, Moses is the man. He's the leader. And then one day, as hundreds of thousands of the Hebrews are gathered together at kind of the entrance point of the land of Canaan, this land that's eventually going to become theirs, right? So they went from here, now they're up here. They're in Canaan. They're on the verge of entering the land. We read these words. Moses, the servant of the Lord, died. So the only leader that the Hebrew people have known since leaving Egypt is gone. There's no way they can imagine a future without him. They loved him. In fact, after Moses dies, someone writes an obituary about his life. And one of the things they say about his life is this. They say, no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. Like, nobody has been used of God in the same way. This guy's legendary. I mean, here we are thousands of years later and we're talking about him. Books have been written about him. Movies have been made about him. Action figures have been created of him. But now Moses is dead. And it's fascinating because apparently he dies in this valley and no one's around. It's kind of like he's off by himself. And it's like he's buried with just dust and sand and dirt. And this is fascinating to me. Nobody actually knew where he was buried. In fact, we read this commentary about his burial place that to this day, no one knows the exact place. This is super intentional. It was like God's way of saying, hey, your faith should not be in Moses. Ultimately, your faith should be in me. I mean, God knows that if they knew where Moses was buried, they would not show up with flowers to put on the grave. They would show up with picks and shovels and say, we're digging his body up, right? They would put a shrine or a cathedral around his burial site. They would turn this into the city of Moses. But God wanted the people of Israel to move on. And so instead of protecting the past, he wants them to embrace the future. So he dies. Here's what we read next. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. So God says to Joshua, Moses is dead. But the vision, still alive. The vision that God gave to Abraham 500 years earlier, Joshua, this vision that he'd have lots of descendants, right? They became known as the Hebrew people, and that they would grow and grow and grow, and one day they would form their own nation, and they would have property and territory to call their own. That vision, I want you to know, is still alive. It's a vision that had been passed down from generation to generation, and for the past 40 years, Moses was the carrier of that vision. Moses was the one responsible for keeping it in front of people, but now he's dead. The vision is not dead, but Moses is dead, and it's Joshua's responsibility to carry it forward. So when we talk about Joshua, we're talking about Moses' assistant who led the Hebrews into the land of Canaan, which eventually became known as Israel. All right, Canaan became known as the nation of Israel. It's a heavy responsibility. Hey, Joshua, for 40 years, Moses was the man. Now you're the man. You've got to keep this in front of them. This is your responsibility. It is a heavy, heavy weight. In fact, it's so heavy that one of the very first words that God spoke to Joshua were these: be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land I swore to their ancestors I would give them. The reason God tells Joshua, be strong and be courageous, is because every single vision is eventually met with fear and resistance. It's met with challenges. It involves change. This past week, I was thinking of some of the challenges and some of the changes we've experienced at Great Lakes Church over the years as we've been on our journey, as we move forward with our vision. If you've been around, you've heard me talk about some of these challenges, right? Financial challenges, facility challenges. Many of you know we started out at Tinseltown Movie Theater. We had 5 adult auditoriums. We met there for 8 years. 5 adult auditoriums, 7 children's auditoriums. That was a challenge. Over the past 14 years, I kid you not, we have met in 17 different locations. When it comes to worship nights, events, weekly services, right? 17 different locations. We've started programs and initiatives. We've ended programs and initiatives. We've had staff members join the team. We've had staff members leave the team. We've had challenges trying to navigate all the changes in culture. Learning what are you allowed to talk about and what are you not allowed to talk about? What's going to stir people up and what's just going to keep the peace, right? We've had challenges as we've tried to stay focused on our mission. What are the best strategies to stay focused? What's our vision? Where are we going in this season? We've had challenges in being adequately staffed during certain seasons. Pre-pandemic, the average church in America had 1 full-time staff member for every 75 people that attended. I just read a study recently that said it's now 1 in like 46, right? 1 in 50. So 1 full-time staff member to every 50. And it's just because as churches are not necessarily the same size, they've held on to a lot of the same staff members. Great Lakes Church, I kid you not, we are 1 full-time staff member for every 125 people who attend. And I've always prided ourselves saying, man, I love the volunteer culture here, and I do, and it's a strong culture. But I also know that's not where we need to be, right? That's not where we need to stay. In every single chapter of our church, we've had to look at where we're at, and we've had to say, as we go into the next chapter, we have to leave certain things behind. And that's okay. Because if we try to hold on to everything from the last chapter, we never get into the next chapter. You can't live 2 chapters simultaneously, right? Like many of you, I love living in the Midwest for different reasons. And one of the reasons I love is just the seasons. So I love winter. You know why? Because in the winter, I get to hunt. Yeah, that's why. I get to go hunting. I love hunting. And the colder it is, the more deer move, so I love it. But I also love summer. I love warm weather because I get to go hiking, I get to go tubing, I get to go rafting and all those fun things. But here's what I know. It is impossible to enjoy the benefits of winter and summer at the exact same time. I have to embrace the seasons we're in. And whenever we go through change, we're going to feel it. We're going to sense it because we're moving from one thing to the other. Sometimes it's moving from one geographical location to another. Sometimes it's moving from being single to being married. Sometimes it's moving from having no children to having children. Sometimes it's moving from one career to the next. Sometimes it's moving from a position or a role to another position or role. Often it's moving from an attitude or a mindset to another attitude or mindset. Change requires us to give up something every time in return for something else. And this is what makes it so difficult to get into new seasons. Because human beings, we like comfort. It's hard. So this past week, my wife, Rennie, and I, we went with some of our good friends to watch the movie Jesus Revolution. Now here's the deal. In the history of this church, I have never talked about a quote unquote Christian movie or recommended one. I'm telling you, this was a fantastic movie. I'm not going to talk about the acting or all of the things that we could say, hey, how do you review this? And how do you review this? I'm just telling you, I wish everyone could watch it. And the reason why is it's a true story. It is a story of a pastor named Chuck Smith who is trying to lead a congregation in Costa Mesa, California, about 25 people, and he's struggling. Now, I promise you, I'm not going to spoil the movie. I'm just going to tell you what's in the trailer, all right? So 1965, Pastor Chuck, he's struggling. He's trying to lead a church, and he ends up crossing paths with a charismatic hippie by the name of Lonnie Frisbee, all right? Now, Lonnie and Chuck are very different. Chuck's a pastor. Lonnie is this hippie, has a very different life. But they become fast friends. Chuck sees that Lonnie has a deep love for Jesus. Lonnie is incredibly gifted as an individual. He's a good teacher. And so Pastor Chuck says, hey, Lonnie, why don't you start doing some of the teaching at the church? And Lonnie started doing that, and he started attracting people like himself. Hippies started showing up, right? In society, they felt like outcasts and misfits, but they knew at Calvary Chapel we're accepted. And so the church started growing. And they ended up having to move out of the small building that they were in, just a small little church building, and they put up a large tent. And young adults began showing up in the droves and surrendering their lives to Jesus. So much good was happening. It was a new phenomenon. And here's in this just video clip here, you're looking at Pastor Chuck, right? He wasn't like this super young, charismatic speaker. This is just some of the music. But here's this church at 25 and exploding. You got Lonnie here speaking, just, again, being himself. And people are flooding, wanting to learn about Jesus. And as they're surrendering their life to Jesus, they're being baptized in the hundreds. This is one of the baptisms out in the ocean. Again, hard to see, but it was a movement unlike any other. Well, many of these hippies, as they showed up to church, they showed up barefooted. And there's a scene in the movie that alludes to this, and I went and researched it because I was like, come on, man, I want to make sure that this actually happened. But one Sunday, Pastor Chuck shows up to church, and there's a sign on the door that says, "No bare feet allowed." Well, one of the long-term members of the church had put it up because they had put new carpeting in the church, they had nice pews in the church, and they just wanted things to stay clean. So Chuck rips it off the door. He calls his leaders together. And he says, I just want to be very clear with you. If you turn one person away because of bare feet or dirty clothes, I will personally rip up all the new carpet and get rid of all the pews, and we will bring in folding chairs. Chuck understood that in order to impact a new generation, they would have to change some of their thinking and embrace a new mindset. And so God ended up using Chuck Smith, who, come on, let's be honest, most of us have never even heard of, to launch the greatest spiritual awakening in American history. We will never begin a new chapter if we try to hold on to everything from the previous chapter. And so if Israel is going to move into this new territory and they're eventually going to settle into the land of Canaan and it's eventually going to be known as Israel, they need new leadership. Moses and Joshua, very different. Different personalities, different giftings, different passions, different leadership styles. And the reason they were different is because God made them that way. God didn't want them to be just alike. He had different assignments for them. And so God prepared them in different ways. I've seen that in the history of our church. We're different seasons. We have people come, we have people go, and it just seems like God gets us ready for whatever season we're in. Moses, Joshua, very different. Moses grew up in Egypt. He was trained in Egypt. He was educated in Egypt. That's his background. Joshua, he was just a kid when they left Egypt and started spending time in the desert. So he grew up really in the desert, in the wilderness. For the most part, that's his upbringing. Moses had a shepherding background. Joshua had a military background because when the tribes would attack, when different nations would attack, right, and they're in the wilderness, Joshua was a part of that. And it's pretty fascinating. There's actually this story that we come across in which the Amalek tribe ends up attacking the Hebrews, and Moses looks to Joshua and says, hey, I want you to go fight them. Lead the people. He says, I'm gonna go up to the mountain and I'm gonna pray. It's like, I love that. Moses is like, I'm not the guy who's going to be fighting you. You do that, but I'm going to do what I know how to do best. But he understood that they have very different personalities. And so when Joshua replaced Moses as the leader of Israel, the shift in direction and emphasis took place. We experienced this in the pandemic, right? Churches around the world shut down. Nobody was showing up in person. And so what did we do? We said, all right, we're going to shift right now. We're going to do online and we're going to go virtual. And then as the pandemic started winding out, we said, okay, we're going to open up in person again. Oh, by the way, we're also going to keep virtual and online. So now we're going to be a blend of both. We wouldn't have done that without the pandemic. It forced us to change things. Our very first blood drive at Great Lakes Church happened during the pandemic. Red Cross calls us. They say different organizations are pushing us away. They're saying we don't feel comfortable opening our doors. Would you open doors? And we said, man, we would love to. In Simpson, we've had many, many blood drives. Been a blessing to many, many people. We wouldn't have done that if the pandemic didn't provide and open those doors and those opportunities. Well, this is what happens to Israel. Moses dies, and the Hebrew people enter a season different than the previous season. They now have to conquer some territory. So now they have to kind of come together and act as like a military. They had to shift from civilian mentality to military mentality. Well, when someone enters the military, they have to give up their stuff. Right? When someone enters the military, they used to be able to do what they want, when they want, how they want. Oh, no, you give up your freedom now. You say, I'm no longer just an individual. This is something bigger. I'm no longer a spectator, I'm a participant. Well, Joshua's training, his skill set, his personality was better than Moses for the new challenges ahead. Now I'm gonna ask you a rhetorical question here. Right, if we could get in a time machine and we could go back to when Moses died and we knew where it was and we raised him from the dead and we put Moses in front of the Hebrew people and we put Joshua in front of them and said, hey, as you go into the land of Canaan, which will eventually become Israel, which leader do you want leading you? Who would it be? I'm telling you, almost every single time, the answer would be Moses. Even though Joshua had the training, the skill set, and the personality better fit for the new season ahead. Well, why would they have chose Moses? Well, the same reason that we'd hold on to Brett Favre and Michael Jordan, Tom Brady if we could forever. They would have chosen Moses because that's who they knew. He had led them for 40 years. They were comfortable with him. They were familiar with him. And as humans, we gravitate towards what's comfortable and what's familiar. But God had been preparing Joshua the entire time he was in the desert. And as long as Moses was the leader, Joshua's potential was hidden. He never had the opportunity to lead. Here's the deal, endings are necessary. The worst case scenario would have been for Moses to continue leading forever because the Hebrew people would have had a leader that was better equipped for the past than he was for the future. And often, when God gives a vision to an individual or to a group of people, it is not for just a single generation. It's meant to be carried into multiple generations. And all throughout the scriptures, we see transitions in leadership. Moses to Joshua. We see a guy by the name of Elijah transferring to Elisha. Even Jesus, at the end of his time on this planet, transfers the vision to the 12 apostles. Well, as you probably know, we recently had transitions of leadership at Great Lakes Church. Right, Pastor Rex, who was with us for 4.5 years, he transitioned off his staff and is working with Habitat for Humanity in Racine. And then last week, we learned that our good friend, Ashley Gavin, who's been with us for years, that her husband has recently taken on a role of director of athletics at a D1 college in Illinois. Super proud of both of them, happy for them, but now we have another leadership transition. People are asking me, Dave, are you stressed? No, every day I get up and say, my faith is in you alone. No, of course I'm stressed. Hey, Dave, are you feeling the burden? Of course I am. But here's what I know. In this season, there will be new volunteers and there will be new leaders who step up to the challenge. And in this season, our board of directors, our stewardship team, we're asking questions. What are we doing that's good but not best? What's sick but not getting better? What's long since dead? What's our mission? How do we best accomplish our mission? What's the best strategy in this season? So we're looking at org charts. We're dreaming. We're thinking about the future. We're saying, what positions do we want to make available? How do we want to structure our church? How do we want to structure our services? So prior to Ashley letting us know that, hey, we're leaving, we're talking about like moving forward. And we know we need to add another service on Sunday morning. Currently, we have 2 services. We are filling it up. Last week, outside of Easter, was the highest attended Sunday since the pandemic. It's exciting. We're going to 3 services. We announced this Sunday, March 12th, we're going to 3 services. And now I'm standing in front of you to tell you we're making a shift. We're pausing. Instead of moving to 3 services on Sunday, March 12th, we're just pausing. And we're going to take this next month and we're going to breathe a little bit and we're going to structure some things and we're going to look at where we're headed and we're just going to say, all right, Lord, we put this in your hands. Give us wisdom, give us direction, because here's what we know. God, you're bringing people in. There's momentum. Exciting things are happening, but we have to look to you. And we have to trust that you have the future in our hands. Lord, Racine campus, it's in your hands. It's not in ours. We need wisdom. We need guidance. And so I encourage you to continue praying for us. I've been so encouraged with the emails and with the texts and the people who stopped me and said, Dave, we are praying and we do care and we do love this church. And in this season, I'm going to be asking you, if you're sitting on the sidelines, this is a season to step up. This is a season to say, hey, I'm willing to volunteer. I'm willing to serve, whether it's with kids or with our music team or with our campus experience team. But this is a season that we need all hands on deck so we can get into the next chapter, whatever that is, that God has for us. So let's pray, and let's once again, as we have in many, many seasons, hand this church to him. Heavenly Father, this is your church. It's not ours. So we surrender it again to you. Not our will, but your will be done. Bring the right people together in this season. connect us with the right staff members, clarify the vision for us, and help our leaders as we continue to strategize and do what we believe is best for the history or for the future of our church. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for joining us here at Great Lakes Church. Again, my name is Carson, and I'm so glad that you chose to share some time with us this week. We hope something in this talk was meaningful to you, encouraging to you, and maybe even something worth writing down that you can go share with a friend. If you'd like to get involved, maybe join us at one of our physical locations in Southeast Wisconsin, or just be a part of our many other goings-on our social platforms or events in the area. Check out greatlakeschurch.com.